In today's video, we're going to be going through Gran Turismo 7 Sport Mode's basics to help newcomers and also people that have been playing for a while that might not know everything that you need to know in Gran Turismo 7 for the Sport Mode. Now, some of this information hopefully will help you boost your DR a little bit higher and maybe help you get a little bit further up in Gran Turismo 7, so feel free to smash that like and subscribe if it does so. So let's start with Gran Turismo 7 Sport Mode basics. To enter Sport Mode, you're going to go into the top right hand corner and click on the Sport Mode. From here, you have three different sections. You have the daily races, the online time trials, and the manufacturer's championship, or the GT World Series section, which will have nations, manufacturer, and the Toyota series within that section. So let's first go into the daily race section with three different races available. Always daily race A, B, and C. In general, daily race A is your race that has no SR and is a little bit more of a casual approach. Now, Gran Turismo tends to use road cars more often for this race. You can check whether DR is active from the race details. I always advise that everyone should check these details because when it comes to daily race C and B, there's settings in there that you need to know to help your DR, because if you miss one of them settings, it's very likely that you're going to lose DR. For example, in daily race C, you're very often going to have a compulsory pit stop along with a tyre change, often two different compounds. So you need to pay attention to that. The amount of people that miss that and then get a 1 minute penalty is actually quite crazy considering we're into such a far stage on Gran Turismo 7. So always check them settings there and then you won't make the mistake of losing DR through that fault. Now you can go into a further race detail section from the bottom right hand corner and get every little detail about the race, including whether the slipstream is on real or custom. Now this is important for high downforce because when it's running real, it's a little bit harder to follow, but when it's running custom, in general the slipstream strength is a little bit too strong in my view, but it's a little bit easier to follow. Now as we go for daily race B, this race tends to be a bit of a shorter race with no pit stops, although I still recommend you always check whether a pit stop is required because we have had daily race Bs with pit stops needed in the race. So always give it a check just in case, because you don't want to be that person that gets a 1 minute penalty and lose a massive amount of DR, because DR takes a lot of time for some people to build up and you do not want to be losing a big chunk with a little mistake like that. So next up, we're going to go into the online time trial section. Now this section of Sport Mode is where you're going to earn quite a bit of credits. Every week we have always two active, but they rotate on a weekly basis and they give you the opportunity to earn either 2 million for the gold, 1 million for the silver, and 250,000 credits for bronze. Now, in all honesty, I think most people can just jump on and do one lap and earn 250,000 credits with these with just a very slow lap. So you can see there the bronze time is over 10 seconds away from the fastest time in the world. And I think most people, with even if it just takes 2 or 3 laps, should be able to get a bronze time. So a very easy and quick way to earn credits on Gran Turismo 7 is the time trial section. Now, as for the championship section, the GT World Series Toyota Cup section, this is where Gran Turismo Sport becomes a little bit more competitive. It's the esports side. With in-session qualifying, you do not qualify through time trial. You actually have a session within the race. Depending on what class you are in, the details change for the race, whether you're in GT1, GT2 or GT3. GT1 sometimes have longer races, so do bear that in mind when you see people practicing. Everyone has different races, which you can check out your settings from the race description, which you showed before. Now, you can earn credits from the manufacturers, nations and stuff, depending on where you finish within a championship. So there is another way of earning credits from that. And obviously, within the GT World Series section, the championship section, your driver rating can actually be improved a little bit more than through daily races. There is more DR to be gained, but that means there's also potential to lose a little bit more DR through these championships based on where you finish in your races. Now remember that the matchmaking in these championships is a lot closer than daily races. You race a lot more people around your level, so the racing should be a little bit closer and a lot of fun for you to enter. And I always recommend people go for these and give them a go, even if you're not too sure or confident to do it. I think you'll have a lot of fun in racing these. Now you can see from the profile screen, you can see your DR bar. When it comes to A+, that goes from 50k to 150k now. So very few people will be getting 150k in my opinion, but you also have your sportsmanship rating, and that's really important to know that your S rank could still be decreased even if it's still S. So it goes from 81 to 99 in terms of a figure. Those that played GT Sport will know all about this through Kudos Prime. That doesn't exist now on GT7 because PD do not allow the information to be shared. However, there is other websites. I think GT Online Hungary, if you sign up to them, you can actually get some of your information with regards to driver rating and stuff like that from their website. And I think they're actually extending it further in the future to allow more information as well. So feel free to check their website out. Hopefully you can get your exact settings from them in terms of what your ratings are. Now, one thing I think that everyone should be aware of, whether you're doing daily races or online time trials or the GT World Series Championships, is that you can rent cars for every one of these races without spending a single credit. You simply go into the rent an event specified car, and Gran Turismo will give you all the tyres and everything you need to race that race. There's a lot of people that don't realise this and don't do races because they think you have to buy the cars, but you don't. You will be restricted in terms of the livery. You'll have to use a livery that comes standard with the car, so you won't be able to put your own livery on it, but you will be able to take part in any race that you want without owning them cars. Now let's get on to the DR and SR basics of how it works in Gran Turismo 7. Now, one common mistake that a lot of people make is that starting at the back of the grid and working further forward in a race gives you more DR and SR. This is completely false. Your DR will only progress based on where you finish in a race. It doesn't matter if you start P1, finish P1, or start last and finish P1. You will gain the exact amount of DR that you would even if you started in P1, whether you start at the back or not. It's where you finish in a race. In terms of SR, obviously if you start further forward, in general you will have a little less chaos, so you might gain a little bit more SR because you won't be involved with as much battling and overtaking to lose that SR. But in terms of your drive rating, it is purely based on the rank of the lobby, the average rank, and plus cars that finish ahead of you, behind you, whether they're higher ranked or lower ranked. All of these factors will have an influence on how much drive rating you gain within a race. So for example, myself in this race, starting from the back of the grid and working my way forward, will gain me no extra DR than if I started at the front and finished in the same position. It is purely based on the drivers you beat and who beats you within a race. Now, when you join manufacturer races, for example, or nations races, you do see the actual rank that you are within that lobby. When you enter it, it will have what position you are in. So if you're 6th on that list, that means you're the 6th highest rank in that lobby. So you want to aim to finish around that area at worst. Otherwise, risk the chance of losing DR within the race. Now, unfortunately, daily races do not give you that ability to see what rank you are within the lobbies. It used to on GT Sport, used to give you a car number. But if you want more information on exactly how this works, I advise you follow the YouTuber that I've put on screen there. You can check out of his channel, and he has a video that goes more in depth within the DR and SR system. Now, with regards to SR, one thing to always pay attention to is how many sectors there are on a track, because this is how you clean your SR up. So for example, Brands Hatch with 5 sectors, short lap, very good track to clean it up. Le Mans, not so good with a long lap and not so many sectors. Now, improving in sport mode, there is many different factors you can do to help improve your DR and SR within sport mode, including the online leaderboards. This is a section which I think most people should be aware of, but not everyone's probably using it to its full benefit, and it's somewhere you should be actually using to improve. So you can always load up anyone within the top 10 or anyone who has got within the top 10 on the time trial, as long as their ghost is showing. So for example here, we're loading up Antonio's world record, I think, at this point of the week at Fuji, and we're watching his lap. Now this is really important to do because you can see when he's changing gear, what gears he's using for the corners, a rough idea of where he's braking. Now there is a factor that you should be very careful on when looking at their braking. You should always look for the brake lights where they're illuminating, because for example here you can see there is no braking input on the replay. However, the replay only shows you the ABS input, so it only shows where the ABS kicks in, and it's not going to show you the full initial input of the brake. So you can see we're on the brakes here, and you can see it's only just starting to show at that phase of the braking phase. So be very careful when looking on the replays at where people are braking, because you can be misguided a little bit with that. Now, as we were talking about shift points, there is a way of seeing the optimal shift point of your car. If you go into the ECU, you can see the peak power and the torque of the engine. Now this is an important part to actually look at for every car that you're racing, because it will give you the optimal shift point within a degree. Now there is some flexibility that needs to be known, but yeah, in general it will give you a rough idea. So for example here, I'm at Monza and I'm in the McLaren Group 4 car, notorious for its short shifting. Now we're going to show you an example of the difference between short shifting this car and revving out, and try and show you why you're doing this. So on this go, we're going to rev this out completely to the end of the rev. You can see going almost pretty much to 9,000 RPM. Now what you'll notice here is how it seems to be losing power at the end of the rev range. and this is why checking the ECU is extremely important to do. So as we come to the end of this acceleration zone from the first chicane to the next braking zone at Monza, we're going to look at the maximum speed at the point of braking. So we're just about to get on the brakes here, and we're at 138 miles per hour. Now we're going to then do the same thing again, but we are going to short shift this ever so slightly, just around 8,000 RPM, or just before 8,000 RPM is the optimal, I think, on the McLaren, which we'll have a look at in a minute. And you can see as we come through, you can already see straight away the gap to the AI that we're racing, because we got more acceleration. And you can also see the power of the car just seems better. You can see, you can hear it, you can visually see the difference straight away. And what you'll notice when we get to the braking point is that our speed is going to be higher. Now you can see at this point here, I'm shifting just before that 8,000 RPM point, and I actually think that might be slightly over revving it, and probably best slightly shorter than that. But you can see already the difference in speed. By the time we get to the braking point, which is there, we're doing 141 miles per hour. That's 3 miles per hour more. Now if you added that up over a lap, it's a considerable difference. And you can actually see here, when you go to the ECU of the McLaren, you can see the huge drop off in the torque and the peak power. And this is why you should always check for the cars that you're driving. Now, the McLaren is one that most people will know about, so I use it as a prime example because it's probably the best example of a short shifting car, I think, on Gran Turismo 7. I think the BMW in Group 4 is also a good example of how you can short shift, because that bar, it literally starts really early on in the rev range. So there's different cars that you should always check and make sure you pay attention. Now, one other thing about improving on GT7 Sport Mode is picking a car that's right for you. Now for me, I'm not a massive fan of the BMW M6 because you have to be very progressive with the throttle, and I'm quite aggressive with the throttle. So for lower rank drivers, this is really important. Pick a car you're comfortable with. For example here, I'm going to get aggressive on the throttle, and the BMW is just going to snap on me instantly, because the way this car delivers the power is very aggressive, and it's not to my liking in general. Now I can get used to it with a bit of practice, but I'm going to show you the difference now. We're now in the McLaren Group 3 car, and we're going to do that same corner with pretty much the same aggressive style, and you're going to see a total different way that this car behaves compared to that BMW. And it really does highlight the point of finding a car that suits your driving. So you can see again here, super early on the throttle, and what happens is I actually have to lift because of understeer. This car will not snap the rear anywhere like that BMW. So it is definitely a case of find something that works for you, not always the meta, especially if you are a lower ranked driver. Finding something that works for you that you're confident with to boost your DR up is a better idea than going with the meta. Now, one other thing to pay attention with any group, with Group 3, Group 4, etc., is the high or mid-speed BOP. Now, if you want to check the full listing of this, I suggest you check out GT Engine. They have the full settings for the BOP within high and medium on their website. Now, when it comes to using the ghosting system on Gran Turismo 7 to help improve your pace, there is many different options you can do. You can use your own ghost. You can also use a loaded ghost. Now, I in general use a loaded ghost rather than my personal best ghost. That's just my personal preference. It's how I like to improve on my time trial. Now, another thing you need to be aware of is you can offset the ghost within Gran Turismo 7. Now, I offset it to 4 temps. This is personal preference. You can go all the way up to 2 seconds. Now, the only problem I see with 2 seconds is the car is that far ahead. You're not really going to learn much with it that far in the distance. Now, another important thing is I always reset my ghost at the reset points. So every sector, the ghost will reset. And there is a big advantage in that, is that the ghost isn't going to pull away. And you're going to then see which sections you're losing and gaining on more so than if you just leave it to go off into the distance. So for example here, we've let him get a little bit ahead, and it's going to reset back to 4 temps ahead of me. And it's one thing I always do, because you can then pinpoint exactly what corners you're losing on to where you're actually matching him on. So watch what we're going to do here. We're going to completely come off the throttle. We're going to let that ghost go around 1.5 to 2 seconds ahead. We'll pretend we've had a massive mistake there, and we're going to let him drive off into the distance. Now, it doesn't matter how far away they go, the ghost will always reset if you use that reset function. It's a function that I think everyone should be using within GT7, because in my view, what's the point of having a ghost on if they're 3 seconds up the track? Resetting it every sector is vital to improving and understanding where you're losing out. So now let's take a little look at the assist within GT7 and what assist you should be using and what assist you should not be using. Now, in terms of transmission, I always advise manual is the quickest way, and it will obviously help you massively on GT7, especially with short shifting. Now, TC, I don't use TC. However, it depends what rank you are. I always say this: if you aren't comfortable with TC off, feel free to use it. If you're more consistent with it, you're going to improve, and then when at a later stage you've improved on the game, you can then slowly take it off to a point where you're comfortable without it being on. But definitely don't feel like you have to have that setting off, especially if you're, I would say, A to B, C rank driver. You know, if you're an A plus driver in general, you're going to want to try and get used to it off, but even then, there's people who use TC that are A plus. Now, in terms of ABS, default or weak. I rarely will you have it off unless you're in a go-kart, for example. That is one exception. You can have it off for the go-kart, but it is purely preferential really with weakened default. One thing you will need to understand that is weak ABS does use up more tire life when it comes to high tire wear races, but it can feel like it rotates the car more. So it is a preferential thing, but in general, I've recently been using default as my main way of racing on GT7, especially when it comes to racing time trialing. Yes, you can experiment with a weak, but in general, even then, I've been using default. Now, braking line assistance and stuff like this is, again, very much preferential, and your driving line. Now, what I would say with the driving line is it can be used to your benefit in wet conditions. I don't personally do it because I find it like a little bit cheating, but yeah, you can use that to help you see where the wet line is because you avoid the driving line, and it does give you a little bit of an advantage in that situation. Now, braking areas, some people use these with the highlighted zones for your braking. Personally, I much prefer using brake markers and understanding the track, because then every different car you come in, you already know roughly the markers that you're looking for. And in general, what you find is higher speed cars have better brakes, so you're always using similar brake markers. In terms of active stability management, I don't really recommend it. I'd say stay away from that one. Counter steer assist is an interesting one. You can have certain situations where that will help your car in terms of stability. However, in GT World Series, that very often is banned and you cannot use it in the esports side of the game. So I always say turn it off, don't use it. Just stick with your TC and ABS, and you know, if in general, try and wean yourself off the traction control setting. Now, another area which you can use that not everyone will be aware of is the sounds of the game, and one area is the tire squeals, which will give you a signal of understeer or oversteer, and it can actually give you an early sense through hearing of what the car's doing, and a lot of people will actually turn this to the maximum. I personally can't do it because I can't stand the sound of it, but it is an actual thing that a lot of people in different sims as well, whether it's iRacing or ACC, will have that maxed out completely. Now, in terms of controls on the Gran Turismo 7, always make sure you have the boost overtake button mapped on your wheel or controller to somewhere that's accessible while driving. I have it on my R2 button there, you can see, because it just requires me to use my thumb while steering. I can use it in steering and I can still change gear. And it's, yeah, I always say, pick somewhere on your wheel or controller that is easily accessible, and if you've got it there, you won't miss out. If you jump in a daily race that has it active, it'll be there and available. Same with the handbrake. I use that for standing start so that I can just use my thumb on the handbrake and then leave the revs going, and you won't lose out anytime. Now, in terms of controllers, settings wise, one thing that I notice a lot of people use on a controller is controller steering sensitivity at 10. On a wheel, it's totally preferential. Sometimes I have my sensitivity down to 5, but in general, recently I've had it on 5 and 10. But again, this is dependent on the wheel you use, how you like the car to behave. So it is purely individual. I wouldn't recommend you take someone's setting from one brand of wheel and try and use it on a different brand of wheel, because it will not behave the same as it would on, say, a Thrustmaster to a Fanatec. It is definitely a case of pick the setting that you feel comfortable with. Experiment. Try it on its lowest setting. Try it on its highest setting. Get a feel of what that wheel feels like on the two extremes, and then you can try and get a setting that you feel comfortable with. When it comes to the controller, though, definitely 10 from what I've heard from other controller users. Now, there is one thing in Gran Turismo 7 which you'll notice, and it is possible that you can blow your engine in a daily race, even with BOP on. So this is extremely rare, but it technically is possible. It's been done by a few people, so try and make sure that your engine is in decent condition. It won't affect, with normal oil and stuff like that, it will not affect the performance. BOP takes over and your car will be running the exact same acceleration, the exact same top speed. However, the one area that I've always been a bit suspicious of is the final setting, the restore setting there, which if you read on the bottom, it says about the tire grip, and that is the only area which it probably does nothing, but I tend to do that setting more than any of the others in general, because just a little bit suspicious of it. But yeah, hopefully this video will help you out with some very basic information for sport mode. I do intend to doing some more in-depth guides based on some other stuff like brake bias. Again, I did one on GT Sport. I'm going to go into a bit more detail with that in a separate video alone, because I think although there is optimal ways of running brake bias. It's not always optimal for everyone. I think preference of how a car drives is sometimes down to how you brake. It's not always the same for everyone, which we're going to go into detail and make an individual video on. So yeah, if this has helped you out, which I hope it has, feel free to subscribe to my channel, hit the like button. It all helps me out, and hopefully we can do more in-depth guides within some of the more advanced areas of sport mode in the future, and I look forward to delving into that a little bit more for videos. But yeah, hope you enjoyed it. Take care everyone, and I'll see you for more live streams, videos and YouTube shorts in the future. Have a great one everyone.